Brothers and sisters, welcome to AquaBrain TV. On this show, we're chatting the dynamics of education before and after the Crown shutdown. Welcome to the brain, John Coleman. John, how you doing?
Good, Andrew. How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is awesome, man. Thanks for reaching out.
Yeah, I saw your chat there with Clint, and I enjoyed that. I saw some of the other things you did with your other guests, so I thought I'd touch base there.
Right on, right on. Yeah, man, always happy to have new people on the show. It's awesome. I like what you've been doing, and although I have to admit, even after the phonetic pronunciation of your institute, I'm still going to let you pronounce it for the folks.
The school is called AquaBrain. AquaBrain. You can say that 10 times fast and you probably get no better at it. I'm not much good at it myself, but there we go.
APOC-ASTAS-STAY-CEASE.
That'll do. All right. So
all right.
Restoration there. Restoration. So
restoration. Okay, excellent. Yeah, before we get into this talk, I've got to tell you, so we've been emailing back and forth. And I just sent you a message that said, hey, I'm getting everything set up for the show, and I'll be sending you a code soon. And then you responded, and it didn't have any context. And then the next time I went to look for your email, the email provider that I'm using, which starts with a G, had wiped our conversation. And so that's why I was a little late to send you that code. So thanks for your school, or the institute, has messages on Facebook from me, basically saying, I don't have his email. I need it. We're supposed to be meeting. It's like, so.
My goodness gracious. I've heard things like that with other guests in the past. That's very peculiar.
Well, I mean, come on. I'm a little guy, but we must be touching on something. So,
well, and most of the censorship stuff's all automated at this point. So you don't know what robots are doing their math.
From where, what context, or what. I think what we were emailing back and forth about was pretty benign. So I have no idea. I have no idea. All right. So tell me a little bit about the institute. Tell me a little bit about your background.
Sure. I think, like a lot of people growing up, didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I think that's perfectly normal, in fact. And just some of us later in life don't know what we're going to do, and that's perfectly normal there too. But on that conveyor belt of public education, which actually served me pretty well, I didn't really have too much of a focus. I was just like a lot of people, especially of that generation, going to go to college. And that isn't something that I wanted altogether, but that's where I found myself in my late teens, early 20s, studying history, which I always liked. And I was asked to teach just a few classes at a little, it was a little startup school, we'll say, a little startup school. A lot of the families had come out of homeschooling, and they kind of want to pool their resources and so forth. And so that's how I got introduced to teaching altogether, Andrew, with that early experience.
Okay.
And then going along, to make a long story short, as things were progressing, I was growing as a teacher. Naturally, I saw things that I didn't like, not in that particular place so much as the milieu of how we do education. And so, indeed, long story short, that's what got the ball rolling for Apocatastasis, which is my attempt with some other scholars to address those concerns on the grade school and also on the college level, some of those critiques, and we could talk about those critiques later here.
Yeah.
And then also, however, to maintain what's good about a formal school and what's good about that environment, which sometimes is lost in alternative modalities. So we've been plugging away nearly a decade now at the school here, and I'm still upright, so there we go.
Cool, man. That's awesome. Before the Crown shutdown, what were the dynamics of schooling?
I think like a lot of institutions in society, there had been, and a lot of changes that needed to be made that had been building up and not addressed. And so some of those would be demographics. For instance, people of our age, more or less, there was kind of a baby boom of sorts, in the 80s and 90s, and that explained why people of our rough age range, partially why we all went to college, a good lot of us, and why there was that. Also, people of about our parents' age were very much inheritors of that post-World War II. So they would have been roughly the children who were raised by the World War II generation. They had inherited a lot of that GI Bill idea of go to college. This is you're rung up on the ladder, so to speak. And so what's happened since the what's politely called the Great Recession, which is a very weird term, but the depression at the end of the Bush into the Obama administrations.
Is that the housing?
That was the housing bubble.
Thing?
It's often
Okay.
called in the press the Great Recession, but it was a much bigger thing.
Okay.
George Bush called the Congress together. They came very close to declaring martial law at that time. Wow. There was that's why they started propping up all those houses. The whole thing was going to come down. Anyway, college enrollment, well, baby numbers have gone down since then. Since the Great Recession. And so those are the people that are going to be in the decade ahead becoming college age. The people who would have been or not been born a decade ago were going to be the college age ones coming up. And that birth rate had been going down through the 90s. So demographically, you had, to answer your question, you had a system that was geared for huge enrollments that was predicated on worldviews coming after the Second World War. Okay. And all of a sudden, all those baby boomers are, retiring, or they're aging out of being parents, and, with older children. And then you have the two things, a whole new paradigm, largely, not always in a good way, but largely influenced by social media and a lot of the changes there. And that's going to press directly on education, as we'll see. And then also less babies who are, less, 18, 19 years old now, less butts in the seats, so to speak. And so that's a big thing that's come, come to light, we'll say.
So you had this push to get people out of the farms, right? You had this, and this is maybe before the war GI Bill thing, but that was probably that kind of catalyst that really allowed people, right? So it was, okay, we're going to promise you something, go to college, learn a skill. You don't need to learn, you don't need to have all these skills, right? They're just clogging up your brain. Just go pick one, we'll take care of you. And then the GI Bills and everybody, this huge influx. I know my great grandpa came, like, his stepmom was on a farm. They had milk, they were selling all this stuff, milk and vegetables and all this stuff. And then he went and became a professor, right? And so that was kind of like, I'm not sure what that was his stepmom, I think, and his stepdad, or his dad and his stepmom. I'm not sure about the other side, but so that there's this huge push to get people off the farms and into schooling, learn a trade, learn a skill. And then there's an influx of people. There's lots of children born, and they're going in. Yeah, there's lots the protest and drugs and all that other stuff, but a lot of people are going to learn something. Now those people are older, right? And less children are being born. And you brought up this thing about social media, but there's something I wanted to touch on too, and that's like the mental cognition of those kids that, or the people now that are going, right? So there's less people, but then even of that percentage, do you find that how many can handle a college system?
Yeah, that's a fine question there, Andrew. And it's a big question too, although it has a rather simple answer, but if you allow me to tease it out some.
Mm-hmm.
So what developed in this country in the 20s and 30s, after grade school, or what we call middle school up here in Connecticut, what developed was you either at 8th or 9th grade, what we call that now, you either went into a high school, which was basically college, with more academics, or excuse me, you went into high school, you went into what was called high school, which was a trade school,
Okay.
or you went to college. And then at the time of about the Second World War, the labor unions, which I'm very much fond of, but it was not a good thing in my opinion. The labor unions finagled the Roosevelt administration to manipulate funding and national funding and so forth. And so it became the de rigueur after World War II to go to high school and then to go to college.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
And so what this leads to is inevitably a prolongation of childhood. So childhood begins its long creep up until our days, where with a straight face, people like NPR will be asking, can we say that childhood ends at 25 years of age? Can we say that it ends at 30 years of age? And so we see that creep, and this is without social media and things like that. It's just something people have noted for quite a while. So you're asked about, preparedness for, at 18 or 19 for college.
Yeah, exactly.
You have that as a background, and then you have, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I suppose you need, certain mental stability, and that's something we're facing a great problem with across the world. And there has been quite a bit of research done on the effects of COVID-19 across the world. I'm talking in the psychological journals and things about the damage that this did to mental stability. Mm-hmm. Because modernity breaks everything up, we're so used to everything being in its own proper spheres. But what we eat has a role on how we behave in class and how we sleep, and so forth. And so the aspect of mental health is also, besides these long-term cultural changes towards the perpetual child, to mental health crises and anxiety and then all of that. So the answer is not very many people. I shouldn't guess what that number might be, but this is a problem. And you can see this, as far as numbers are concerned, in the amount of time that school districts are having to allot for mental health days, not just for their staff, but also for students. They're elongating vacation times and so forth. Which is this is not a critique of the public schools, but it's possibly a kind of a pulse of maybe a very much larger mental health crises, doubtlessly exacerbated by the crown closings, as you said. And so this is not good. I mean, with not just on the direct aspect of mental health, but it's also not good for discipline. If you have to take every couple of days off because of mental health breaks, that's not good if you're in terms of trying to academically build things. That's why in the New York Times, as of yesterday, from this recording, the New York Times pointed out that the city test scores, especially in mathematics, have gone down. And it's the whole testing thing we can critique, but they have something to say, and when you see drops of 10 or 15 or 20%, that says something. And you have other similar observations in the press lately. We're recording this in September of 2022.
Last day.
Yeah, the last day. So yeah, that would be the answer there, that mental health has been really damaged by COVID-19. I mean, you have, in terms of grade school kids, it seems middle school on up are actually the ones who did worst.
Okay.
In that, I mean, if people were in their damn rooms for 2 years,
Yeah.
not talking to people, and so getting people back in the swing of things is, academically, to say it in other ways too, has been and will be going forward very difficult. There's only two other, and this is my final point, I hope I've answered the question. There's only, in my research, I spent a lot of today just getting my ducks in a row. And there seems to be only two other examples of a much smaller nature to this type of shutdown. Like, how do people do with school shutdowns and then going back?
Right.
And that seems to be the nation of Kuwait after the first Iraq War in the early 1990s, and even more limited way after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, and following out the children from those shutdowns. And in both cases, it was not encouraging. It was not encouraging. They ended up going into jobs that were in lesser esteem socially and economically. And so it had effects. The point I'm saying, it had effects on later life, not just immediate academics.
Having the lockdown, having people basically away from their friends, that physical interaction, and then when people were getting together, they were not seeing maybe facial expressions and stuff like that. So how has that affected kids now going back to school, in your opinion or professional opinion?
Well, I was driving around yesterday, as I'm wont to do, and I must say, as preface to this statement, I've seen more car crashes in the last year driving around, and near misses, including with myself, time and again, than I've seen before. So I can see the degrading of social interactions. It's really something else. And as I was driving around yesterday, Andrew, I saw the school buses, and I was, and you see all the kids there. None of them were talking to each other. When I was on those school buses a couple days ago, let's say, more than a few days ago.
Yeah.
But when I was, a kid in those that situation, I mean, everyone was talking. Everyone was turning around. They were talking. This was nothing. It was all just kids looking up with the earbuds and just staring at the seat in front of them.
Even on public transit. I mean, I noticed that going away a few years ago. I guess about 7 years ago. The amount of conversations and the comfortable conversations that I would have with people went down drastically. Almost everybody was plugged in. And how is that, you think, a precursor to this this now digital education, right? You've got everybody now has a computer, right? So they had this influx of buying computers for everyone, right? And so now everyone essentially has their own computer. And I mean, do you think there was any sort of like premeditation to any of this educationally?
Educationally, definitely not, in the sense of the bureaucracy and so forth. No.
Okay.
In the sense of other aspects of the power structure, without a doubt, yes. Yeah, the educational system, and I'm not just saying the public schools, but also private schools. I'm not just saying grade schools. I'm saying the whole field, and I would even lump in a lot of the homeschool world with that. Because we're humans and we have human nature, and these are combinations of humans, we often don't make changes that we like. I think Mr. Jefferson says in the Declaration of Independence, right? People will put up with headaches and so forth, rather than change them. People are much happier being comfortable. So the bureaucracy of the schools um, has not changed in many respects. I mean, in 150 years,
Okay.
in certain aspects of it, it's very much like the German model that folks like Horace Mann brought over here after their visits
But
to Prussia and so forth. Yes.
are you seeing a decline in, now we were talking about numbers earlier, right? The number of people going, but are you seeing a decline, you think, in the people that are now learning online as opposed to people that are actually going into the brick and mortar locations?
In the schools, in the grade schools, I should say, I believe it's pretty much back to normal. I don't suppose there's any of the half and half, the online or whatnot, except I should say, because of the greater mental health problems, there have been provisions made in that regard.
Like high school, junior
Yes,
high.
exactly. Yes. For that. And so all things being equal, it's not a good sign that there's more mental disorder,
No,
but
right.
it's good that more provision is made for those souls. I do know, having contacts at one of the universities down the street, I do know that there's been a much bigger push for online courses.
Yeah.
Now,
College or just in general?
in college, and this example was college at
Okay.
Western Connecticut State University. There, one of the professors was telling me that, and I've had a mixed bag at Apocatastasis. I've had a mixed bag with online courses. If it's an adult, and if someone's really, you know, they come to the school,
Okay.
online courses can be fine. If it's a child, I would say the class is, 50% as potential if you're dealing with a grade school child, and particularly like elementary school. It's just chalk and cheese. The difference, because I do have some students where I meet them. And then we do the other session or two during the week online. And so with those constants, I can tell you that the in-person learning is much more effective with the young ones than the online. So you have a slight provision for the mental health, to recap, for grade schools. That seems to be an enduring legacy, as enduring as we can tell things a year on, we'll say. And then a much more widespread use for colleges. And I don't think that's anything other than trying to maintain whatever enrollment that they can at this hour, because that's falling off the cliff across the board.
Yeah.
Across the board.
So what do you think could be done? Like, what's the...
Well, I mean, the place to answer that question is to go check out your local colleges, and you can see what they're doing, trying to well, I mean, you've worked in a lot of service sector, it sounds like. So have I. And I've worked in a number, I've never owned a failing business, but I've worked in a number of failing businesses. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but after a while, almost like on Whirlpool, a lot of problems catch up with businesses that have been put on the back burner, and they've just been shelved. And hey, that vortex is it's like a mile away. I'm moving very slowly around the curve, but the more you get there to the center, the more difficult it becomes. And what colleges are facing now, Andrew, is they're starting to notice that vortex is picking up. They've had 50 years to steer out of some of the problems as a field, and they haven't addressed them. What they've done instead is belly up to the financial interest in this country. And so what's explaining this drop off? Okay, mental health. Okay, immature students that shouldn't be going to college. So it's good that they're not, frankly. Fine. But also, the colleges in this country have lost a lot of social esteem.
What do you think?
Some of that. Sorry.
What do you think led to that? Like, where do you think that?
Yes, I think some of that is latent anti-intellectualism in America, and in certain elements of the political discourse, there's a hostility there. I certainly know that, being very intimate with the homeschool world and the alternative education world, there is that aspect, and that's a whole other discussion where that comes from. I think in brief, it comes from, kind of the democratic, we're all equal. I don't need no education. We're all, whatever, a nation of kings or whatever the old rhetoric was.
Yeah.
And some of it, I think, has to do with more nuanced things that indeed are another discussion. But part of it is, where does the loss of face of the academy also come from? Well, it comes from their own the decisions that they've made. I alluded to the financial warmth, and that's a very polite way of saying the colleges in this country have had no moral qualms throwing under 2 and 3 generations of youth to bankers.
Crank it up.
Crank it up. Yes.
Yeah. And sports, right? I don't know if sports have anything to do with it, but it seems like more of a focus on sports. And what's that thing Clint talks about? Patents, sports and patents, and then charge through the roof.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that aspect. I think especially with some of the the schools that really go in for the what's the college league? I forget, but yeah, who really, that is a cash cow. I mean, some of those college sports are a real cash cow. So yeah, that's an aspect too, and we saw that even before the Great Recession, as it's called, where you had colleges, because you have to understand, whether it's grade school, Andrew, or college education, that because America is such a diverse country, least of all ethnically, but religiously, philosophically, because of that, what education has come to fill is largely a religious need in our culture. So this isn't Syria where everyone's Muslim, or, there isn't a homogenous, and what do religions have? They have rituals. They have rituals of belonging. So education in this country largely fills that void, because there is no unified religion. The educational ritual is largely filling a lot of that need for us.
Okay.
And so, to get back to the point I was making, what you saw even before and certainly after the Great Recession, and really now as that vortex is coming, is schools are portraying themselves, used to hear this, right? The college experience. Yeah. Right. It wasn't. So you mentioned, kind of getting off track with football.
Yeah.
Or patents, which Clint would be a good man to consult there. And I hope the audience checks out that previous talk, because colleges are very involved in that aspect.
Yeah.
But also that idea of the college experience. So you had colleges, neglecting their academic departments, which at this point, in the humanities, I keep an eye on this, as you might imagine, they're just shuttering up whole departments of history, whole departments of literature, or they're merging them all together.
Well, and what's that doing to the teachers?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So you had the students, they were all pitched, great workout rooms, great cafeterias, great little movie theaters in the college for the college experience. Sure. And then the academics, to your point here, the academics going back at least 15 years were more and more shunted off. I mean, the academics as the teachers were more and more shunted off. And so you have the examples I just mentioned, except oddly enough, in the schools that the ruling class send their children to, in these so-called Ivy League schools, those humanities departments are packed. The people are crawling through the windows. They can't get enough of history and literature and religion and philosophy. We're given mathematics and biology and natural sciences and everything else, all the stuff that deals with the soul and the emotions and all that. That stuff is this knowledge that we have is the product of centuries of discourse and research and writing, and that sensitivity there. I should say we do have brick and mortar locations, but they're very often, more times than not, the parks and the cafeterias and the libraries. So that physicality is important, but I'm afraid at this hour, because of certain legal decisions I've made with the college, it's very difficult to rent property.
Oh, got you. Okay.
Without having a legal person.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So tell me about the institution as it stands right now, and how do people contact you, and how do people learn more about what you have to offer?
Sure.
And
So the institute, as it must be, is very ideological, in the sense that I've spent, the past decade, and actually longer than that, preparing for the work, laying out the vision. And so we have, philosophically, before I get to the nuts and bolts of it,
sure.
we have these four communities that we're always trying to hit and serve in a particular order. And the first of them, as I term it, is the dead generations past. That is to say, the authors and those who the researchers of the knowledge long gone. We have this obligation, which I think academia has dropped the ball on, of carrying on this tradition. This literally handing on is what tradition means. So handing on this academic tradition, and that's very difficult for a lot of people, just because of a lot of dynamics of our day and age. Everything is kind of ready-made, so we don't understand these long ideas of discourse and discussion, and then how do we translate that to those who will be here after us. So those academics first, and then after that, towards what we were just talking about, Andrew, we serve teachers. I am always trying, and a very, very fond desire to always reach out to other teachers, because a lot of teachers have been done wrong by this, by academia. It's not just the students. I've lost count of the number of stories in the press of academics, particularly so-called adjunct teachers, dying in their car, freezing in a tent.
Oh, really?
All this stuff.
No,
I mean,
that's
yeah,
terrible.
this is you. There's been such a disgraceful labor condition for teachers, not just in academia, but also on the grade school level. And unfortunately, getting back to the anti-intellectualism in America, a lot of people, they don't really appreciate teaching, and so a lot of those stories are quickly forgotten if they're brought up at all. And after that, then the students, and then the general public. And I could elaborate, as I have for a decade, on the nitty gritty, but in terms of the philosophy, that's what we're hitting. And then trying to incorporate a lot of the great insights from homeschooling, unschooling, autodidactism, deschooling, which maybe some other time we can explore the nuances between deschooling and unschooling and some of the tribes in that neck of the woods. But in the nuts and bolts, we have various aspects of free material, we'll say, online. We're getting a Rumble account. I keep getting kicked off of YouTube because they won't shut up about certain things. We've worked up our Rumble account, BitChute, and all of that. So we have a lot of material there, because I do feel colleges have, especially colleges, have an obligation for public enrichment, we'll say. And then we also have, if at all possible, to meet in person. So I have some locations around town here that we meet, depending on the weather and so forth. And that's always much, much better than online. But I've been, I've had a learning curve like anyone else the past couple of years with online work. So after a while, I've tried to provide against as many of the downsides of the online stuff, and try to keep that rhythm and so forth, even on the online stuff, with regular broadcasts and regular classes and so forth.
If I'm in Idaho, say, and my daughter wants to take a Latin class from you,
hey, you come to the right place.
Okay, so hypothetically, how would that work?
Great. So the individual would contact the school, and that's Apocatastasis Institute at AOL.com. And at that point, we would have a meeting very similar to this format here, but not recorded, and just to kind of get to know each other and what we're looking for. And then after that, I usually invite the student to sit in on some classes, depending on when it is in the semester, to sit in on a few classes, what we call auditing, to see, to get a feel for things. And then after that, we can more formalize things. But yeah, typically for the class, we meet 3 times a week, depending on the subject. Sometimes we'll meet less, but for longer blocks, if that's easier. Especially adult students have families and all this stuff.
Work and whatnot.
Yeah, so it's pretty, it's formal. There's a methodology, but it's pretty informal for, people have asked me, well, where's the enrollment form? We're not, we're still mom and pop enough, so to speak, that we don't need to do that. And it works out rather well. All things considered.
That's very cool, man. I thank you for doing it, because it needs to be done, right? And I feel like the humanities are a very important thing. I was not a big reader, and recently have become more of a reader.
Looks like it with that bookshelf there.
Reading things like I've got almost every book that Pat Jordan has written, which is just, it's incredible stuff that he gets into, and like the words in there, like reading scientific words and this and that, and it's like some of the stuff, some of the stuff just was so far over my head. I was getting a college course, and science stuff, but even reading some of these other books, like that History of Great American Fortunes, and just kind of trying to soak in what literature has to offer. There is so much distraction now with the technology and all that stuff, and to offer humanities classes in a way that people can, that you're fluid with how you're offering them, is what it sounds like. Look, you're in the Connecticut area, let's try to meet up. You're not in the Connecticut area, how can we use video conferencing to make it work for you, and so you can still get that education. And I love what you're doing with your institute, and we definitely have to talk more. Thanks for coming on the show, John.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. It's been a blast.
Thanks for joining us on AquaBrainChats. Check us out on Instagram @BrainAqua. This is how you subscribe to us. This is a video we think you'll like. Go buy a shirt. Link in the bio.